It was exactly 6 minutes after lunch when the knock came, an interruption that, by Wolfe's standards, ranked just below a home invasion. The menu had been lamb cutlets with tarragon, sautéed mushrooms, and Fritz's idea of a perfect béarnaise. Wolfe was leaning back, eyes closed, contemplating whatever mysteries the digestive process holds for him, and I was doing my bit to keep quiet until the doorbell decided to ruin it. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. He simply said, "Archie, that's my cue in the same way play ball is for the umpire." I left the dining room, wondering which unfortunate soul had chosen this exact hour to test their luck. At the front door stood a woman in her late 30s, the kind who looked like she'd spent a long time learning how not to cry in public. Her hair was the right kind of wrong, too carefully arranged for someone who claimed she wasn't trying, and her gloved hands clutched a manila envelope that had seen better days. I said, "You've caught the house in its sacred hour. Either you're lost, desperate, or reckless." "Which is it?" She managed a brittle smile. "Perhaps all three. My name is Lydia Chalmers. I was told Mr. Wolfe might see me." That made me blink. Nobody told anyone to see Wolfe unless they'd already paid the admission fee, metaphorically speaking. Still, there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't used to being ignored. "All right, Miss Chalmers," I said. "Come in, but don't expect applause." She stepped inside, taking in the brownstone like a tourist glimpsing a cathedral. I led her to the office, where Wolfe was already at his desk, his eyes now open but clearly wishing they weren't. "Mr. Wolfe, this is Miss Lydia Chalmers," I announced. "She's either lost, desperate, or reckless." Wolfe tilted his head a quarter inch, which was his version of a bow. "Sit, madam. State your business succinctly, if that's possible." She took the red leather chair like someone sitting down to confess. "Mr. Wolfe," she began, her voice crisp but trembling at the edges. "I work for the Metropolitan Culinary Institute. It's a private school for professional chefs. 3 days ago, one of our instructors, Mr. Alan Kramer, was found dead in his apartment." I felt Wolfe's interest stir, faintly, like a breeze moving through a curtain, and he said, she leaned forward, "The police ruled it a heart attack, but there was something they overlooked, a recipe card on his counter, stained with blood, just one drop, perfectly round. It wasn't his." Wolfe's brows moved closer, a sure sign that his mind had stepped into the arena. "How do you know it was not his blood?" "Because I had it tested," she said simply, "without authorization. The blood type was AB negative. Alan was O positive. That did it." Wolfe opened his eyes fully and looked at her as though she'd just claimed to have found a truffle in Central Park. "You arranged a private laboratory analysis of blood evidence from a police-closed death?" "Yes," she said, unapologetic. "Because I don't believe he died naturally. He had enemies, competitors, and a secret recipe he guarded more fiercely than his wallet. Someone wanted it." Wolfe closed his eyes again, as if sealing the thought away. "Madam, I dislike intrusion. Yet you have brought me one. Why come to me?" "Because," she said, her voice dropping, "yesterday morning I found the same recipe card, an exact duplicate, in my office drawer, and this one had my initials written on it, in blood." I glanced at Wolfe. His lips pressed together, forming a horizontal line that could have bisected a lesser man's courage. He said, "Phooey, that's Wolfe for you, interest me despite my will." "Archie," he said quietly, got the envelope from her. I took it. Inside was a clear plastic sleeve containing the recipe card. It was for something called Ragu di Parma, Confidential Formula 3. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and near the top corner, sure enough, a single dark brown fleck, the kind that used to be red. I asked, "So, what was this secret recipe supposed to do? Raise the dead?" She shook her head. It was part of a research project for a flavor stabilization technique that could revolutionize packaged foods. Alan was going to sell it to a corporation, but he died before the deal. Wolfe murmured, "A chemical miracle in a kitchen apron." "How appropriate." He gestured at me. "Archie, make note, we are dealing not merely with murder, but with greed disguised as gastronomy. And madam, before you proceed further, do you intend to hire me?" Her eyes flicked between us, uncertainty in every line. "If you'll take the case, yes. I have a retainer for $2,000. "2,000, Wolfe repeated, to disturb my digestion and my peace. He closed his eyes again. "You may leave the card. I shall think." That's as close as Wolfe ever got to saying yes. She left soon after, shoes clicking like tiny warnings down the hall. When the door shut, I turned to Wolfe. "So," I said, "you're interested?" He sniffed. "Interested? Hardly. Intrigued, perhaps. The distinction matters. Blood on a recipe card bag. But why return it to her, and why mark it with her initials? That archai is a question of taste. Meaning? Meaning, he said, that someone is seasoning this affair for my palate. And I intend to know the cook. To be continued in Section 2, the brownstone disturbed. By 5 o'clock the next afternoon, Wolfe had done what he always does when faced with a puzzle that smells faintly of human folly. He'd planted himself in his chair, tilted back, hands resting on the arc of his stomach, and declared a moratorium on all sound except that made by orchids or thought. I had learned that silence from Nero Wolfe isn't absent from its occupation. The man's mind moves like a glacier, slow, cold, and utterly unstoppable. Fritz was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he experimented with a sauce that could make angels trade their harps for spoons. I was at my desk pretending to read the afternoon paper, but actually watching Wolfe for signs of life. There was none. Not until the phone rang. Wolfe grunted. "I got it." "Goodwin," I said. A woman's voice, tight, professional, and carrying the clipped tone of someone trying hard not to be afraid, came through. "This is Lydia Chalmers. I didn't want to disturb you, but something's happened. Someone broke into my office last night. Nothing was taken, but every file drawer was open. And the recipe card I left with you, are you certain you still have it?" I looked at the desk. The plastic sleeve lay exactly where she'd placed it, beneath Wolfe's magnifying glass, untouched since yesterday. "Yes, Miss Chalmers," I said. "Safe and sound. Want to tell me who you suspect?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. But there's a man chef, Julian Ferris. He and Alan Kramer were partners years ago. He left the Institute after some scandal about stolen formulas. He's just been rehired. And today, he told me I'd regret involving the police." I glanced at Wolfe. His eyelids twitched, which meant he was listening. "We'll look into it," I told her. "Stay put. Don't talk to anyone else." When I hung up, Wolfe opened his eyes. "Pfui," he muttered, a warning from a cook, the melodrama of knives and egos. "Then you don't think it's serious?" I asked. "I think it's inevitable," he said. "Where ambition and seasoning meet, there is always blood. Fetch the Gazette directory, Archie. We shall start with facts, not flourishes." It took me 5 minutes to dig up the directory entry on the Metropolitan Culinary Institute. Wolfe had me read off the names of the executive board, department heads, and prominent instructors. When I mentioned Julian Ferris, Wolfe said, "Stop there." He closed his eyes again, but this time I could tell something was brewing. "Archie, you will call Inspector Kramer. That brought me up short. Now hold on. You want me to invite the law in before we even have a client who believes we're on the case." "I want," he said evenly, "to know whether the police truly ruled Kramer's death a natural one. I detest building theories on sand. It took a dozen calls, 2 cigars worth of patience, and one promise to meet for a drink I had no intention of keeping but eventually Kramer's gravelly voice came through the line. After a short exchange of polite threats, he confirmed that yes, Alan Kramer had been found dead in his kitchen, alone, no signs of struggle. Heart failure, they said. No autopsy requested. When I hung up, I filled Wolfe in. So that's that. The cops didn't even take a fingerprint. Wolfe made a noise like a bear exhaling, sloth disguised as certainty. Well, then we must earn our fee. He turned his head slightly. You will visit this institute, Archie. Observe. Ask questions. Listen, not for words, but for envy. Envy, my boy, leaves the loudest silence. That was my cue. I put on a suit decent enough to blend in among culinary elites and headed downtown. The Metropolitan Culinary Institute was a glass palace of ambition, too clean, too white, and smelling faintly of lemons and pride. Lydia met me in the lobby, her nerves polished into professionalism. I shouldn't have called you, she said as she led me toward her office. The board will be furious if they find out. Miss Chalmers, I said, when people start breaking into offices and leaving threats in italics, it's already too late for good manners. Her office had modest file cabinets, a desk, framed diplomas, but one thing was off, a faint trace of some floral scent that didn't belong. She noticed me sniffing and said, That's Ferris. He wears a ridiculous amount of bergamot cologne. He came in this morning, uninvited. Did you report the break-in? She shook her head. No. I'm afraid they'd think I'm hysterical. I walked the perimeter of the room. Every drawer had indeed been opened and closed again. Whoever did it wasn't looking for money, they wanted information. I checked the wastebasket clean, almost too clean. Then I saw it just under the desk, half hidden by the chair leg, a torn scrap of recipe card. The corner bore a smudge of something dark brown, faint but visible. I picked it up. Did you drop this? Her eyes widened. No, I've never seen that before. Then congratulations, I said, slipping it into my pocket. You just got your first real clue. On my way out, I detoured to the teaching kitchen. Ferris was there, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and the face of a preacher who'd lost faith in everything but applause. He was orchestrating a class like a conductor, every movement grand, every word dipped in ego. I introduced myself as an interested journalist doing a feature on Kramer's culinary influence. He gave me a smile that could cut ice. Alan Kramer was a fool, Ferris said. A talented fool, but a fool nonetheless. He thought art could be bottled and sold. And you disagreed. I was his partner. He thought recipes were property. I thought they were languages. You can't copyright taste. Maybe not, I said. But you can kill for it. His eyes flicked up sharply, and for a second the charm cracked. Then he laughed at a low, controlled sound. Mr. Goodwin, was it? You have an interesting imagination. You should be careful where you use it. I left him there, stirring something red and fragrant, and called Wolfe from the lobby. Report, he said. Ferris oozes arrogance. I wouldn't trust him to peel an apple without poisoning someone. Excellent, Wolfe murmured. That confirms it. Confirms what? That he is the wrong man, Wolfe said. A true egotist never hides his sins, he curates them. Whoever killed Kramer and now toys with Miss Chalmers is subtle. A showman does not dab his initials in blood. When I got back to the brownstone, the place felt different. The air held a faint metallic tang. Fritz came out of the kitchen pale and uneasy. Archie, he said quietly. Someone was here while you were gone. They didn't ring. They didn't knock. But look. He pointed toward Wolfe's desk. The plastic sleeve containing the recipe card was gone. I called up the stairs. Wolfe's voice thundered down. What? The card, I said. It's gone. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Wolfe said, with the calm of a man pronouncing judgment, So, they dare. Then they have declared war on order itself. He descended slowly, each step deliberate, until he reached the office and surveyed the scene. "Archie," he said, his tone colder than the marble under his feet, "fetch Saul Panzer, and call Miss Chalmers. Tell her our piece is over." He turned toward the orchids, their petals quivering in the draught. "Someone," Wolfe said, "has trespassed on my house. That, Archie, is unforgivable." Saul Panzer arrived within the hour, which tells you everything you need to know about his efficiency. When Wolfe summons, Saul doesn't ask questions, he just appears, like a competent ghost in a tweed jacket. Fritz gave him coffee, Wolfe gave him silence, and I gave him the rundown. Saul listened, nodded once, and said, "So somebody walked into this house, took a piece of evidence off your desk, and walked out without you hearing a sound." "Exactly," I said. "Makes me feel like I should start wearing a bell." Wolfe's eyes were half closed, but the fury beneath them could have boiled Fritz's consommé. "This intrusion," he said, "is intolerable. It was not theft, it was message. They wished me to know they can come and go unseen." Saul looked around the room, scanning corners, thresholds, and window locks. "You want me to find how they got in?" "That and who," Wolfe said. And Archie called Miss Chalmers. "Tell her that from this moment she is to regard the brownstone as her confessional. No statement, no whisper, no sigh to anyone but us." I called her. She answered on the first ring, voice taut as piano wire. "I was about to call you," she said. "Someone left something outside my apartment door." "What was it?" I asked. "A note. Just one line. The cook burns easily. No signature." I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe. He gave a tiny nod. "Bring it here," I told her. "Now." By the time she arrived, Wolfe had fortified himself with beer and logic. She handed me the envelope cream stationery, embossed initials AC, and Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Alan Kramer's personal stationery," he said. "Someone has access to his belongings. Or," I offered, "someone wants it to look that way." She sat down, visibly shaking. "I don't understand any of this. Alan and I weren't close, but he trusted me. I thought I was helping when I tested that blood." Wolfe said, "You were helping, madam. Only not us." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "By acting independently, you signaled to whoever killed Kramer that you suspected them. They have since taken pains to remind you and me that suspicion is dangerous." That silenced her for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "Then what do we do?" "First," Wolfe said, "we restore equilibrium. Archie, you will make a list of all individuals connected to the late Mr. Kramer's culinary enterprise. Miss Chalmers, you will tell me everything you know about their habits, temperaments, jealousies, alliances. Spare me sentiment. I want facts." She hesitated, but Wolfe's tone had the gravitational pull of Jupiter. She began listing names: Julian Ferris' former partner, volatile genius with a martyr complex. Martyr, divine pastry instructor, loyal to Kramer but resentful of his favoritism. Peter Hollis, corporate liaison for the food company negotiating Kramer's deal. Nina Caro, student, last seen with him the evening before he died. Dean Bertram, the institute's director, more politician than educator. As she spoke, Wolfe made occasional noises. Tuck, or the low rumble that means he's filing motives into mental drawers. When she finished, he said, "One of these people killed him, and one of them has entered my home." She looked stunned. "You think the intruder was yes. A suspect would not risk discovery elsewhere. They wanted control of what I possess. Therefore, they are not merely bold, they are desperate." I added, "And they have keys, apparently." That narrows it down. Saul, who had been silent, finally said, "I can check the locks. If someone picks them, I'll know." "Do," Wolfe said. "And Archie, you'll accompany Miss Chalmers back to her building, inspect her door, her neighbors, And her trash. The villain is not a phantom, merely an ego with shoes. We left within 15 minutes. The ride downtown was quiet except for the hum of her nerves. When we got to her apartment, I examined the doorframe. No scratches. The note had been slipped under, not taped. Inside, the place was immaculate books lined in geometric perfection, a desk stacked with recipe journals. But on the small kitchen counter, I spotted something that made my pulse hitch a jar of oregano with a cracked lid. "Do you use this often?" I asked. She frowned. "No, that's Alan's brand. He used to bring it to class. I kept one jar after he." She stopped. I opened it and sniffed. Oregano, yes, but laced with something faintly metallic, like old coins. "This jar's been tampered with." "What?" she whispered. "By who?" "I don't know yet. But whoever broke into your office might have left you more than paper warnings." I bagged the jar with a paper towel and told her to lock her doors and not answer anyone who didn't spell my name correctly. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting like a thundercloud that had read too much Aristotle. He listened to my report, then gestured for the jar. He unscrewed the lid, sniffed, and said one word, hemoglobin. I said, "Blood?" "Precisely. Dried and pulverized. Mixed with herbs." The message continues. A cook who burns easily, indeed. He pushed the jar aside, reached for the phone and dialed without looking. "Saul," he said, "you will visit the Institute tonight. Observe all 5 suspects. Note who arrives, who leaves, who lingers. Pay particular attention to hands. The killer's will bear a small cut or healing wound." He hung up, drained his beer, and turned to me. "Archie, tomorrow morning you will interview the remaining 4 suspects individually. Tell them you're investigating the theft of proprietary recipes on behalf of an insurance company. It will flush the liar. And what about Ferris?" "Leave him for last," Wolfe said. "He already knows he's being watched. The others may yet reveal something useful." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared, puzzled. "A delivery for Mr. Wolfe," he said. "No signature required." He handed Wolfe a sealed brown envelope. Wolfe opened it, extracted a single recipe card, and stared at it in silence. Then he turned it toward me. It was another duplicate of the ragu di Parma, confidential Formula 3. The same handwriting, the same stain. Only this time, written across the bottom in a deliberate scrawl were the words, "You're cooking the wrong stew." Lydia covered her mouth. "What does that mean?" Wolfe's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "It means," he said slowly, "that someone is watching us as carefully as we watch them. They know our moves, and they disapprove." I said, "So they're mocking us?" "No," Wolfe said. "They are warning me that my deductions are premature, which implies they have access to information I do not yet possess." He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded again, but now there was something new in his tone, a cold fascination. "Archie, do you see? They wish to play. Then what's the move?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that could make a cobra nervous. "We oblige. Tomorrow you will meet Ferris first after all. Let him think you are clumsy, intrusive, and easily satisfied. Let him underestimate you. Then you will invite Miss Devine for tea at the brownstone. She strikes me as the sort who crumbles under courtesy. And if the thief comes calling again—" "Then," Wolfe said, his voice sinking to a murmur, "they will find that this house, once trespassed, does not forgive twice." He reached for another beer, and I watched him, knowing that whatever game had begun, Wolfe was already several moves ahead. The air in the brownstone felt different, again, thicker, more alive. Somewhere outside, the city was eating its supper, unaware that a war of recipes and revenge had begun. By the time morning dragged its grey light across the curtains, The brownstone was back to its usual routine of controlled tension. Wolfe was upstairs among his orchids, pretending that murder, theft, and culinary sabotage didn't exist. Fritz was in the kitchen whipping eggs into submission, and I was at my desk, fielding phone calls from people who thought they could schedule Nero Wolfe the way you book a haircut. I had my orders see the suspects, play the insurance man, and make them talk without realizing they were doing it. Wolfe's phrasing had been delicate. Let them measure your intelligence poorly, Archie. It will make the surprise sharper when I strike, which, translated, meant be charming, look harmless, and report every twitch. First stop, the Metropolitan Culinary Institute, 9 sharp. The receptionist, a polite young man with the personality of dry toast, led me to a glass-walled conference room that smelled of disinfectant and ambition. My appointment was with Julian Ferris, the silver-haired maestro of self-praise. He entered like a man who expected applause and found it rude when he didn't get any. His jacket was pristine white, his expression rehearsed. "Ah," he said, "the insurance representative." "Sit, sit. I assume you want to discuss Alan Kramer's poor sense of timing?" "I want to discuss his recipes," I said, "particularly one labeled Confidential Formula 3. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Alan was secretive. It made him interesting, but not indispensable. That formula was a myth. He liked people to think he was sitting on culinary gold. Typical academic delusion. "Funny," I said, "because someone thought it was worth breaking into your institute for." The smile faltered for a millisecond. "If that's true, perhaps you should look among the students. They're thieves by instinct. Inspiration through plagiarism." I gave him a polite nod and jotted something in my notebook just to make him nervous. His hand twitched slightly as he spoke, the kind of movement you see in gamblers or liars. "Where were you the night Kramer died?" He looked offended. "At home, obviously. Alone, regrettably, unless you count my cat, who refuses to provide alibis." He poured himself coffee, ignored me, and stared at the window. I left after 10 more minutes of verbal tap dancing. Second stop, Marta Devine, the pastry instructor. Her office was a shrine to sugar shelves of cake molds, a wall of glossy photos featuring her desserts, like portraits of children she actually liked. She greeted me with cautious curiosity, her apron dusted in powdered sugar. "I already spoke to the police," she said. "They asked dull questions. I prefer yours to be interesting." "I'll try." "How well did you know Alan Kramer?" She smiled faintly. "Better than most. Worse than some. He liked people who argued with him, and I'm fluent in disagreement." "Did he have enemies?" "Alan collected enemies like others collect cookbooks, but no one hated him enough to kill him. Except, perhaps, himself." "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said, dusting flour from her hands. "He was proud. Pride kills quietly, without fingerprints." I thanked her and turned to leave, but she stopped me. "If you're looking for ambition, Mr. Goodwin, look at Peter Hollis. He pretends to serve the Institute, but he serves the corporation." He was desperate to finalize Kramer's deal. That gave me my third stop. Hollis was a corporate man in the culinary world, a fish in a frying pan. His office sat off campus in a rented suite with a view of money. He wore a perfect tie and an expression that belonged on a billboard for trust you shouldn't give. When I introduced myself, his face lit up with the salesman's delight. Ah, insurance. Finally, someone practical. Terrible business about Kramer. Unfortunate timing, too. His proposal would have been worth millions. "Millions," I repeated, "and you were the middleman." He chuckled. "Facilitator, not middleman. My company negotiates exclusive licensing for flavor technology. Alan's formula could have changed the industry. Then I suppose you've heard of a recipe card gone missing." His tone cooled. "If that's your lead, I'd suggest you widen your net." The card was nonsense. He'd already digitized his data. The hard copy was symbolic, aux, sentimental, nothing more. Yet someone thought it worth stealing twice, I said. He blinked. Twice? Once from Kramer's apartment, once from ours. That last bit wasn't exactly Wolfe-approved intel sharing, but I wanted to see his reaction. It came faster, a flicker of genuine surprise, then calculation. Yours? You mean the brownstone, Mr. Wolfe's place? Word travels, I said dryly. Do you know him? By reputation. Genius, glutton, tyrant, the trifecta of success. I smiled. You forgot an immovable object. When I left, I had enough tension in my notebook to string a violin. Hollis was slick, Devine was brittle, and Ferris was poisonous. That left the student Nina Caro and the director, Bertram. Nina met me in one of the Institute's practice kitchens. She was 24, maybe, with nervous hands and eyes that looked everywhere but directly at you. I told the police everything, she said softly. I found him. He was lying near the stove. I thought he'd fainted. There was sauce spilled everywhere. What kind of sauce? Tomato base. But thick. I didn't taste it. You shouldn't have to, I said. Did you notice anything missing? She hesitated. His notebook. The small black one. It wasn't there. That made the fifth connection. Kramer's formula, the notebook, the blood, and now the recipe cards all circled back to something tangible. Wolfe didn't believe in coincidence, and neither did I. My last stop, Dean Bertram, was more politician than cook. His handshake was warm, his words refrigerated. Mr. Goodwin, I trust your employer appreciates confidentiality. Our institute's reputation is fragile. Reputation's not my problem, I said. The truth is. He smiled like a crocodile in prayer. Truth, he said, is a matter of presentation. Alan's death was tragic, yes, but hardly mysterious. He was overworked, overpraised, and underappreciated. Was he? I said. Funny people say the same about martyrs. His smile thinned. I advise you to focus your inquiries elsewhere. When I returned to the brownstone that evening, Wolfe was at his desk surrounded by empty beer bottles and blooming smugness. He gestured toward the single envelope on his blotter. A courier delivered this an hour ago, he said, addressed to me, unsigned. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of Kramer, alive, seated at a table with 4 of the people I'd just interviewed. They were smiling, wine glasses raised, and on the table, in clear view, was the recipe card. Dinner of the damned, I said. When was this taken? 2 nights before his death, Wolfe said. It appears our suspects dined together. A final supper, perhaps. And note the bottle of Chianti in the corner. The label reads, Tenuta Ferris, a private vintage produced by our friend Julian. He folded his hands. So, the circle closes. You have done well, Archie. Tomorrow you will visit Miss Caro again and retrieve that notebook. And when you do, tell her this. Nero Wolfe intends to taste what Alan Kramer died for. The last light of day slanted across the office. Fritz came in quietly with the dinner tray, and for a moment the air smelled of roasted garlic and peace. Wolfe reached for his fork, eyes narrowing with thought. Archie, he said, I dislike amateurs who play at artistry. Somewhere in this stew of vanity, someone believes themselves a creator. I will show them what creation truly costs. The next morning began with Wolfe refusing breakfast, which meant the world was off its axis. He claimed he wasn't hungry, but I knew better. When Wolfe skipped Fritz's eggs, it was never about appetite. It was about control. The case had gnawed its way into that iron stomach of his, and he was digesting facts instead of food. He'd already sent Saul to check hospital supply logs for any AB-negative blood donors connected to the Institute. That's Wolfe. If you smear blood on a recipe card, he'll trace the donor before lunch. Meanwhile, I was to retrieve Nina Caro's missing notebook, assuming she still had it. I drove over mid-morning. The city was grey with drizzle, the kind that makes traffic lights look philosophical. When I reached the institute, Nina was waiting near the entrance, clutching her satchel like a guilty conscience. "I brought the notebook," she said, before I could even greet her. "But you have to promise me something, Mr. Goodwin. If Mr. Wolfe finds what's in it, he'll destroy it." "That depends on what it is," I said. She handed it over. A small black book, frayed around the corners, pages dense with chemical formulas and notes that looked more like laboratory data than recipes. "Kramer wasn't developing a sauce," she whispered. "He was developing a stabilizer, something that could keep flavor compounds fresh indefinitely. The food company wanted it for mass production, but he discovered it was toxic in concentration. He was trying to rework the formula." I flipped through it. A few pages were missing out cleanly. "And those pages?" She hesitated. "He destroyed them himself. Or so he said. But after he died, Ferris told me Alan had finally perfected it, that he'd sold it. I didn't believe him, but you're not sure. I finished." She nodded. Her hands were trembling and she kept glancing at the corridor behind me. "Someone's been following me," she murmured. "Last night I heard footsteps outside my flat." "Did you call the police?" "I called you. That's the kind of thing that gets under your ribs." I told her to go straight home, lock her doors, and keep a light on. I promised Wolfe would handle it, which sounded confident until I realized it made me responsible for making that true. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had returned to remember at hand, irritation in bloom. He took the notebook from me with something close to reverence, turning pages as if they were fragile manuscripts. He murmured. The man was not merely a chef. He was a chemist. This formula could indeed alter flavor retention. But toxica, that changes the moral geometry. "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning," he said, "that whoever killed him was not stealing for profit alone. They were stealing to conceal." Fritz appeared in the doorway, holding a folded slip of paper. "This just arrived, Mr. Wolfe. A messenger boy left it. No name." Wolfe opened it, read, and frowned so deeply that even the orchids upstairs probably felt a chill. The note said, "Your house was not the only one entered." I said, "They've been busy." He nodded slowly. "Archie, fetch Miss Chalmers immediately, and call Saul. I believe our intruder has begun pruning loose ends." Lydia arrived within the hour, pale but composed. She had that look of a woman who'd rehearsed courage and was now performing it. Wolfe handed her the note. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They mean Alan's apartment." "Or Ferris's," Wolfe said. "Possibly both. The thief has learned that what cannot be destroyed must be replaced. We are dealing with someone who edits reality." That sounded like Wolfe was philosophizing again, but it wasn't. It meant someone had broken in somewhere else to erase or to plant evidence. I left soon after to meet Saul at the Institute. He was in the service corridor behind the kitchens, crouched near a maintenance door. "Picked clean," he said. "Someone used a master key. They were careful rubber soles, no prints, but they dropped this." He handed me a tiny brass ring, the kind used to bind key tags together. It had a faint engraving on the inside, MD Martyr Divine, I said. He shrugged. Could be a coincidence. But I saw her car parked out back last night around midnight. That made my stomach tighten. "You sure?" "I don't drink, and I don't hallucinate," Saul said. She was arguing with someone. Couldn't see who. Voices too low. When I circled back, the car was gone. We went inside the kitchen. The stainless steel counters gleamed like mirrors, but something about the space felt wrong. Too orderly. Then I saw a small smear of dried sauce beneath one of the burners. I crouched, scraped it with a knife, and caught the smell. Blood and tomato. The original combination. When I brought the sample back, Wolfe examined it under his magnifier, then looked up with the expression of a man who's just identified a familiar handwriting in a ransom note. "This," he said, "is Kramer's blend. His last dish, as it were." Our visitor not only entered his kitchen, they reenacted his death. Symbolic repetition. It suggests obsession. Lydia, seated across from him, shivered. Who would do something so grotesque? "Someone who admires art," Wolfe said coldly. "Or fears discovery?" I said. "So you think Marta's involved?" "Not yet. But the evidence points in her direction, her keyring, her nocturnal visit. We will not accuse until we are certain. However," he leaned forward, "Archie, you will invite Miss Devine to the brownstone tomorrow afternoon. Tell her Miss Chalmers wishes to consult her on a memorial cookbook for Kramer. Let her think it flattery." Lydia opened her mouth to protest, but Wolfe raised a hand. "Madam, deception is sometimes the purest form of truth." That night, the brownstone felt uneasy. Fritz locked every window twice, and even the orchids seemed subdued. I went through my notes again, Ferris with his vanity, Hollis with his greed, Devine with her bitterness, Nina with her fear, and Bertram with his politics. Every one of them had touched the recipe card somehow, metaphorically or otherwise. Around midnight, the phone rang. Wolfe, in his robe, was already halfway down the stairs when I picked up. A woman's voice whispered, "Tell Mr. Wolfe he's right. Someone is editing reality, and they just erased one more line." Then the line went dead. Wolfe stared at me. "Who was it?" "I don't know," I said. But she sounded like we both said it at once. "Marta Devine." I called her number. No answer. Then the police dispatcher found she'd been found unconscious in her apartment, gas oven on, windows sealed. She was alive, barely. Wolfe's face turned to granite. "Fouet." They grow careless. He went to his desk, tore open the notebook again, and pointed to a margin note I hadn't noticed before. "Control batch, stored at 14B. "Archie," he said quietly, "tomorrow you will visit the Institute's cellar. Room 14B, do not go alone. What we find there will tell us whether Alan Kramer died by science or by its theft." He leaned back, voice low and final. "This killer is not only cunning, they are methodical, and now they are frightened." The brownstone fell silent again, but not peacefully. The air had the weight of something waiting to strike, something that knew it was being hunted. By dawn, the city was grey again, and so was Wolfe's patience. He'd spent the better part of the night with the notebook open before him like a chessboard, tracing formulas with the tip of his pen as if each line were a move waiting to be counted. When I came downstairs, he didn't greet me. He just said, "You and Saul will go to the Institute this morning. Room 14B, bring gloves, a strong stomach, and common sense." I expect all three to return intact. That's as warm a send-off as Wolfe ever gives. By 9 o'clock, Saul and I were in the basement of the Institute, following a corridor that smelled of bleach and ambition. The door to room 14B was locked, but Saul had it open in 15 seconds. Inside, the air was cold and faintly chemical. Rows of sealed jars lined the shelves, each labeled with a code B1 through B10, then another series beginning with C. A refrigeration unit hummed in the corner like a warning. Saul whistled low. Whatever they were cooking, it wasn't dinner. I stepped closer to a steel counter where a small burner sat surrounded by residue rust-color red, granular. Beside it lay a torn sheet of notebook paper with 3 initials written across the bottom. "P.H. Peter Hollis," I said. "Our corporate middleman gets a promotion to prime suspect." Saul nodded, expression unreadable. "Let's bag it all. Wolfe will want the samples before someone else decides to redecorate." We packed what we could, fragments, residue, and one sealed vial marked Test Batch 7. It looked harmless, which made it all the more unpleasant. By the time we locked the room again, My nerves were starting to itch. Whoever had used that lab hadn't cleaned for scientific hygiene, they'd cleaned for panic. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with 2 empty beer bottles and a face that could have discouraged thunder. He examined the vial, sniffed the rim, and set it down carefully. Ferris's arrogance, Hollis's greed, and Devine's fear fit. But something remains indigestible. I said, "If you're looking for dessert," Fritz made custard. He ignored me. "You observed the residue? The iron trace?" "Yeah, smelled like metal and regret." "It is blood, Archie." Again, but this time not human. Bovine. The stabilizer uses hemoglobin as a binding agent. "That's sick," I said. "They're cooking chemistry." He folded his hands. "Indeed. And when one binds a compound with blood, one also binds oneself to consequence." Lydia Chalmers arrived a half-hour later, looking worse for wear. She'd barely slept. "They called off classes at the Institute," she said. "The board thinks it's a safety inspection." Bertram's furious. "Bertram," Wolfe repeated, as if tasting the name for the first time. "The man who values image over integrity. Tell me, Miss Chalmers, does he keep keys to the research rooms?" "Yes, but so do Ferris and Hollis. Though Hollis was never supposed to have physical access. He's corporate, not faculty." "Yet his initials were on a note found in the laboratory," I said. Her hand went to her mouth. "Then he's the one who tried to cover it up." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But let us not hurry. Murder, like cooking, suffers from haste." The doorbell rang. Fritz brought in a small package addressed to me. No return label. I opened it. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping yesterday's edition and taped to it. A single plastic, glove stained faintly red. The clipping headline read, "Institute Instructor Survives Gas Incident." Underneath, in neat block letters, someone had written, "She was meant to die." Wolfe took it, studied the glove, and murmured, "Marta Devine was never the target. She was at the rehearsal." "Rehearsal for what?" I asked. "For the elimination of evidence," he said. "The killer practices successively until confidence outweighs caution. We are between rehearsals and performance." That gave me chills in places I didn't like. Saul came in a moment later, trench coat still dripping rain. I followed Hollis after we left the Institute. He met someone at a diner on 17th Street Ferris. They argued. Ferris left angry, Hollis stayed behind, made a call, then tossed something in the trash. I pulled it. He handed Wolfe a torn sheet from what looked like corporate stationery. The words were scrawled fast, but clear enough. "Kramer's data not recoverable. Formula compromised. Proceed with the acquisition of a substitute." "Substitute," Wolfe said softly. "Not the recipe, someone." Lydia stared. "You mean they were trying to replace Kramer?" Wolfe looked up at her, his voice slow and heavy. "No, Miss Chalmers. They already have." The room went still. He continued. "Kramer destroyed the final version, as Miss Carrow told us. Someone else recreated it from memory, or pretended to. A forgery of intellect. The true motive here is not theft, but legitimacy. The killer needs to prove themselves the rightful heir to Kramer's genius." "Ferris," I said. "He's an egotist. I want to be a genius." "Possible," Wolfe murmured. "But Hollis profits. Ferris preens. Bertram conceals. Chalmers fears. Which of those is capable of turning artistry into homicide?" Lydia flinched. "You think I think," Wolfe said sharply, "that your emotions cloud your discernment. But you are not the killer. You are the lever they use to move me." Before she could answer, the phone rang. I picked it up. Kramer's voice didn't come from the grave, but something close. Ferris, frantic, his words tumbling over each other. "Goodwin, it's Ferris. They're coming for me. I didn't kill him, I swear." "But Hollis." The line went dead. "Where was he calling from?" Wolfe demanded. "A payphone. Sounded like street noise. Traffic may be near 17th." Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie, go, take Saul, find him. But if he's dead already, look not at the body, look at what he was trying to carry. By the time we reached the diner, Ferris wasn't talking anymore. He was slumped in the booth, head on his arms, eyes open in disbelief. No wound, no blood, just a faint smell of almonds. Cyanide. Quick, clean, professional. In his pocket was a folded napkin with the words, "Forgive the thief who steals what is already spoiled." Saul checked the floor, the counter, the exits. Nothing. Whoever had delivered the poison had vanished like a shadow at noon. I called Wolfe from the payphone. He didn't sound surprised. "So," he said, "the rehearsal is over. We proceed to the finale. Return at once. Bring the napkin." When I got back, Wolfe was motionless, his eyes on the notebook spread open beside a new card, the same recipe, this time typed, pristine, no stains. "It arrived," he said, "by messenger, with a note from our unseen author, 'Dinner is served.'" Lydia stood by the window, pale as parchment. "Then it's over," she whispered. Wolfe shook his head. "No, madam. It begins. The killer has issued an invitation, and I accept. Tomorrow, we summon them all to this room." He looked at me. "Archie, arrange it. Every suspect, Hollis, Bertram, Miss Caro, Miss Chalmers. Tell them Nero Wolfe will unveil the true recipe at noon." He poured himself another beer and raised it slightly. "Let them think I mean the formula. Let them come hungry." And as the night settled in, the brownstone no longer felt like refuge. It felt like bait waiting for the hand that couldn't resist reaching for it. By 10 the next morning, the brownstone had the quiet of a storm eye. The office was immaculate, desk polished, globe turned to face Europe, curtains drawn to soften the light. Wolfe sat in his chair as if carved into it, eyes closed, lips barely moving. Fritz had cleared the breakfast dishes without a sound. Even the orchids upstairs seemed to be holding their breath. At 11, Saul called. He'd shadowed Hollis all morning. "He's nervous," Saul said. "Too polished." Rented a car at 9, drove to a print shop on 48th, stayed 20 minutes, came out with a flat envelope. "Bring me the name of that shop," Wolfe said when I relayed it. "And Archie, you will have Miss Caro arrive early. She must not speak to the others before I do." Nina Caro showed up at 11:30. She looked like someone who'd spent the night expecting footsteps on the stairs. Her voice was small when she said, "You said you found something in the lab. Was it dangerous?" Wolfe opened one eye. "Everything is dangerous, Miss Caro, when it intersects with vanity." She didn't know what that meant, and frankly, neither did I. Wolfe was in philosopher mode, which meant he was ready to play his long game. By noon, the others began to arrive, Hollis first brisk, expensively scented, his charm dialed too high Bertram next, polished and careful Lydia after, tense but resolute. We kept Ferris's chair empty. Wolfe had arranged the room with the precision of a trap. Each chair faced his desk, forming a semicircle. On the blotter lay 3 objects: the typed recipe card, Kramer's black notebook, and a single sealed envelope. When everyone was seated, Wolfe opened his eyes. "You're here," he said, "because deception requires witnesses." No one spoke. Hollis crossed his legs, Bertram coughed softly, and Lydia's fingers twisted the hem of her glove. "I have before me," Wolfe continued, "a document whose content has been coveted, stolen, and most regrettably, drenched in blood. Mr. Kramer's formula, the sockled, confidential 3. Its theft precipitated his death. Its reproduction," he tapped the typed copy, "has inspired 2 further crimes, and its absence of truth has unmasked a liar." Hollis smiled faintly. "That's poetic, Mr. Wolfe. But we're talking about food science, not theater." Wolfe's tone sharpened. "I detest theater." Yet here we are." He gestured to the black notebook. "This book contains Kramer's true work, his failures, his adjustments, his final doubts. You, Mr. Hollis, claimed he had perfected the stabilizer. That was false. The compound he died testing was toxic, unstable, and useless. Yet within 24 hours of his death, your company announced a patent filing." Hollis's expression didn't change, but the pulse at his temple flickered. "We acted in good faith," he said. "Allen had given us his last draft. Ferris confirmed it." "Ferris," Wolfe said slowly, "is dead." "Which makes him a convenient witness," Bertram interjected smoothly. "This is absurd. You're implying Hollis murdered Allen to secure a formula that doesn't work." "I'm implying," Wolfe said, "that Mr. Hollis murdered him to conceal that it didn't. When a $1 million deal depends on proof of genius, failure becomes fatal. He used Ferris as his cat's paw, first to verify the formula, then to distribute false samples, and finally to die when the deception risked exposure." Lydia gasped softly. Nina's hands clenched in her lap. Hollis laughed once, dryly. "A clever story, Wolfe. You should write novels. I was nowhere near Kramer's apartment that night." Wolfe's eyes opened fully now, the gold flecks glinting like coins at the bottom of deep water. "Indeed. You sent someone else. A courier. One whose handwriting appears here." He lifted the envelope on this label. "Miss Caro. You recognize it, I think." Nina froze. "That's mine." Two addressed samples for him once Hollis stood. "Now see here. Sit," Wolfe said. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of law. Hollis sat. Wolfe continued. "You instructed Miss Caro to deliver sealed packages from your office to Kramer's apartment under the pretext of routine transfer. Inside was a vial of the unrevised compound still unstable. It reacted with heat. When Kramer began to cook that night, it killed him. No struggle, no weapon, merely the alchemy of deceit." Bertram was pale. "You have no proof." "I have consequences," Wolfe said. The courier's handwriting, the laboratory residue bearing corporate inventory tags, and the post-mortem analysis, Kramer's lungs, showed trace cyanide derived from the same hemoglobin compound. Silence. Then Hollis said quietly, "You can't prove intent." Wolfe leaned forward, fingers steepled. "On the contrary. You proved it yourself when you killed Ferris. He had discovered the fraud and had begun demanding his share. You silenced him with the same toxin, this time dissolved in coffee. And because you are efficient, you wrote him a farewell note that sounded suitably remorseful." Hollis's composure cracked. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to Wolfe. "This is insane. You have no witnesses." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "I have Miss Chalmers." Every head turned. Lydia stiffened. "Me?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "You received the first warning, the first message written in blood. That message was not threat, it was guilt. Hollis believed you suspected him because you had handled the original card. He planted fear to measure your silence." Hollis's voice dropped. "You can't possibly." The front door opened. Inspector Kramer's voice rolled through like thunder after lightning. "Oh, yes, he can." Hollis whirled as Kramer entered with two officers. Saul followed, expression grim. "We've got the lab reports, Wolfe," Kramer said. "Your guess was dead on. The sample from 14B matches residue from Kramer's stove." Hollis sagged. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he muttered, "He would have ruined everything. You don't understand, this was progress. It would have fed the world." Wolfe's voice was colder than marble. "Progress that poisons is not progress, Mr. Hollis. It is vanity." The officers moved in. As they led him out, Hollis didn't resist. He just looked back once, eyes hollow. "You think you're better, Wolfe. You just kill slower." When they were gone, Bertram excused himself with bureaucratic apologies and fled. Nina burst into tears. Lydia stood motionless, staring at the empty chair. Wolfe sighed. "Archie, please see that Miss Carrow gets home safely, and have Fritz prepare dinner. Something honest." I nodded, ushering them out one by one. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back, the fury draining from his face. "Well," I said, "that's one recipe off the menu." He gave a faint snort. "A tragedy. So much effort wasted on deception. Mr. Kramer sought immortality through flavor. Mr. Hollis sought it through profit. Both succeeded only in leaving a bitter taste." He reached for his beer, took a long sip, and closed his eyes. "Archie, remind me to instruct Fritz never again to use oregano from an unlabeled jar." That was Wolfe's way of saying the case was done. Outside, rain began to fall again, washing the city clean, or trying to. The rain kept on for 3 days, steady and unromantic, the kind of weather that turns New York into a reflection of itself. Hollis's arrest made the evening editions, but only the back page's corporate scandal didn't sell as well as blood on the pavement. Wolfe pretended not to care, but his silence had an edge to it, as though the air itself was waiting for him to pronounce a verdict on more than one crime. I was at my desk sorting the latest mail bills, a catalogue for rare orchids, and one anonymous letter written in elegant, slanted script. No address, no return, only 4 words. The wrong man fell. I showed it to Wolfe. He read it twice, his expression unreadable. "Archie," he said finally, "what time is it?" 10 past noon. "Good. Call Miss Chalmers. Ask her to come. Then Miss Carrow, and if Inspector Kramer has not yet returned to his lair, invite him too. It appears our stew is not yet fully seasoned." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Someone is not content with the taste of justice. By 2 o'clock, the brownstone was occupied again. Lydia arrived first, tired, anxious, still trapped between guilt and relief. Nina came next, small and pale, clutching a damp umbrella, as if it might defend her from the world. Kramer followed with the look of a man who's had his patience simmered too long. "All right, Wolfe," he said, slamming his hat on the desk. "I gave you Hollis, I gave you the lab reports, and now you tell me I've got the wrong man. Care to explain why I shouldn't throw that damn chair of yours out the window?" Wolfe opened one eye, unimpressed. "Because, Inspector, gravity is not your ally." "Sit," Kramer growled but obeyed. Wolfe gestured toward the envelope I'd handed him earlier. "This arrived this morning, handwritten, elegant and confident. The author claims Hollis was not the culprit." Kramer snorted. "Anonymous letters always say that. Probably Ferris's ghost." Wolfe shook his head. "No, this one has substance. It uses my phrasing 'the wrong man' fell a deliberate echo of my statement during the gathering. Someone was there, or very near, which leaves a narrow field." Nina shifted in her chair. "You mean one of us?" Wolfe's gaze flicked toward her. "Precisely." Lydia gasped. "But Hollis confessed." "He confessed to avoid disgrace," Wolfe said. "Guilt and truth are seldom identical twins." Kramer folded his arms. "You're saying he lied to cover for someone else? Why the hell would he do that?" "Because," Wolfe said. "Someone gave him a reason. Someone whose exposure would destroy what little remained of the Institute's reputation and perhaps his own ambitions." The silence stretched. Lydia's voice broke it, trembling but steady enough. "Dean Bertram." Wolfe inclined his head. "Just so." Kramer frowned. "We questioned him. He had nothing to gain." "Nothing," Wolfe said, "except his future." Hollis's corporation was prepared to absorb the Institute. Bertram's position depended on that merger. Kramer's death endangered it. When Hollis's forgery failed, Bertram used him as a scapegoat, feeding him evidence, persuading him that cooperation would spare the school and himself. A moral trade, dressed as loyalty. Kramer swore under his breath. "Can you prove this?" "In principle," Wolfe said. Archie, the handwriting sample. I handed him a small slip of paper, Bertram's signature from the Institute's personnel file, courtesy of Saul. Wolfe laid it beside the anonymous letter. Note the curvature of the R, the elongated loop of the G. The same author, and the identical shade and viscosity to that used by Bertram's personal stationery. He tried to hint at innocence while advertising his guilt. Kramer stared. You're sure? I'm never sure, Inspector. I'm correct. He stood, pulling his coat around him. I'll bring him in. But Wolfe raised a hand. Not yet. Let him come to me. Tell him I request a final statement for my records before forwarding it to the press. He will come, and he will talk. Pride compels where fear cannot. Kramer hesitated, then grumbled something about manipulation, and left. Lydia exhaled shakily. I can't believe it. Bertram? He's always been polished, Wolfe said. Polish conceals corrosion. The house went still again until, a little after 6, the bell rang. Fritz answered and returned with Bertram in tow, immaculate as ever, though his eyes darted once toward Lydia, then to the desk. Mr. Wolfe, he said, forcing a smile. Inspector Kramer tells me you wish to issue a statement. I'm happy to assist, though I must admit, I thought this matter closed. Only superficially, Wolfe said. Please sit. Bertram did, carefully. You're suggesting Hollis was innocent? Innocent of murder, yes. Guilty of idiocy beyond measure. You, however, are guilty of more deliberate sins. Bertram's smile didn't waver. You're accusing me now. I am identifying you, Wolfe said. The architect behind both deception and its correction. You arranged Kramer's research under false pretenses, assured funding through Hollis's company, then learned Kramer's final formula was a failure. Instead of halting the deal, you staged a death accident, perhaps, but one you encouraged by allowing him to continue testing an unstable compound. Bertram laughed softly. You're mad. You can't possibly think silence, Wolfe said. The single word froze him. Afterward, when Ferris realized the truth, you poisoned him. When Hollis grew nervous, you delivered him to the police through suggestion and forged evidence. And when I closed the circle too quickly, you wrote to me, hoping to redirect suspicion elsewhere. A misstep, but a revealing one. Bertram's hands gripped the arms of his chair. You have no proof of any of that. Phooey, Wolfe said. I have proof of my intellect. The letter's ink contains traces of glycerin and stabilizing agent identical to that used in Kramer's laboratory tests. You used his own compound to write your confession. An artist always signs his work. Lydia gasped. Nina covered her mouth. Bertram's face changed subtly, but unmistakably. The polite mask slipped, replaced by something harder, colder. You're clever, Mr. Wolfe. But clever men die of pride. I do not die, sir, Wolfe said. I dine. Kramer entered just then, 2 officers behind him. We heard enough. Bertram didn't resist when they cuffed him. As they led him toward the door, he turned once more to Wolfe. You think you've saved something noble, but this city feeds on ambition. Another will take my place before morning. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Then let us hope they cook better. When they were gone, the house exhaled. Fritz appeared with the dinner tray, as if justice required seasoning. Lydia stood uncertainly. Mr. Wolfe, she said, what will become of the Institute? Institutions survive scandals, Wolfe said. People, less so. She nodded faintly and left with Nina. Kramer lingered just long enough to mutter his thanks, then followed them out. When the door closed, Wolfe reached for his beer, took one long sip, and sighed. Archie, you see. Truth, like flavor, cannot be replicated. Only revealed. I said, and what's the morale of this time? He looked at the empty envelope on his desk, eyes heavy but content. Never trust a man who seasons his integrity with ambition. It leaves a taste that no justice can cleanse. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the city gleaming like a plate after supper. The case of the blood on the recipe card was over, but the scent of its sharp, metallic, unforgettable lingered in the brownstone long after the last glass had been washed. The brownstone never feels quiet after a case. It feels hollow, like a stage after the curtain drops, but before the lights go out. For 3 days after Bertram's arrest, Wolfe barely spoke. He read botany journals and argued with Fritz about the temperature of the orchid rooms, but the silence that hung in the office wasn't the kind that followed satisfaction. It was the kind that followed uncertainty. I noticed it first on the 3rd evening. Wolfe had left the office door open, which is his version of a sigh. On his desk sat the black notebook, Kramer's final work, and beside it the typed recipe card, still sealed in its plastic sleeve. I found him staring at them the way a chess player stares at a board long after checkmate, looking for the move he'd missed. He said, without looking up, "Archie, do you believe in closure?" "Not since I started working for you." He grunted, which in Wolfe's language meant I wasn't entirely wrong. "The facts are correct. The conclusions are sound. And yet you're unsatisfied," I said. "Maybe because the case was about food and nobody invited you to dinner." "Bah." He frowned at the card. "There is an element unaccounted for, an unacknowledged variable. I dislike ghosts in the equation." Before I could reply, the phone rang. It was Saul. His voice was low, deliberate. "I think you'd better hear this, Archie. I checked the Institute storage again, just in case. The vials from 14B are gone." "Gone?" "As in stolen. As in someone signed them out this morning with authorization. Lydia Chalmers' signature." I looked at Wolfe. "You'd better sit down," I said, though he was already sitting. He took the receiver. "Saul, are you certain?" "Positive. Her handwriting, her ID code. They say she came by herself." Wolfe thanked him and hung up slowly. "Archie," he said, "fetched Miss Chalmers. At once." When Lydia arrived, she looked bewildered rather than guilty. Her hair was disheveled, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't understand. They told me you sent for the materials." "I?" Wolfe's eyebrows rose. "You received a message purporting to be from me." She nodded, pulling a folded note from her coat pocket. Wolfe read it once, then twice, and his expression turned to stone. The signature at the bottom read, "Nero Wolfe," but the handwriting was not his, it was Bertram's, traced in mimicry. "He's still reaching from his cell," I said. "No," Wolfe said softly. "This was prepared before his arrest. Insurance." He anticipated failure and designed a posthumous nuisance. "Miss Chalmers, what did you do with the vials?" "I left them at the Institute vault," she said, "under lock and camera." "Then," Wolfe murmured, "the stage is not yet dark." I didn't like that tone. It meant Wolfe was about to reopen the case. He called Kramer immediately. "Inspector Bertram's imprisonment may soothe your conscience, but not mine. Have the Institute sealed. No staff, no access. I will arrive within the hour." That last part nearly made me choke on my coffee. Wolfe, leaving the brownstone voluntarily, was an event roughly equivalent to the moon developing opinions. Yet an hour later, there we were. Fritz nearly fainted watching us go with Wolfe in the back seat, frowning at the rain like it had personally offended him. At the Institute, Kramer was waiting, hat dripping, temper already at a simmer. "If this is another one of your riddles," Wolfe silenced. Wolfe said, stepping out and sniffing the air, "I can smell deceit. It lingers longer than bleach." We were led down to the vault by a nervous security man. The door was electronic, the room sterile and cold. On a steel table sat 6 vials labeled in the same series as before. Wolfe leaned over them, sniffed faintly, and said, "Archie, fetch the flashlight from my pocket." I handed it over. He shone it through the glass, turning each vial in his thick fingers. Then he stopped at the third one. "Here," he said. "Note the sediment." Kramer squinted. "So, the compound has changed color, oxidized. Someone tampered with it recently. Miss Chalmers, when you locked them away, were they clear?" She hesitated. "Yes, perfectly clear." "Then we have our spectre," Wolfe said. "A posthumous hand, indeed, but not Bertram's." "Then whose?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped the vial against the light and muttered, "Too much hemoglobin. Too little stabilizer. A false recreation." Kramer's jaw tightened. "Wolfe, if you're suggesting there's another killer, I'm stating it," Wolfe said. "A manipulator beyond ambition, a chemist who saw opportunity in chaos. Bertram was merely the instrument. Someone else understood the formula well enough to alter it after his arrest." Lydia whispered, "Then it's still dangerous?" "More so," Wolfe said. "A single error in proportion, and it becomes volatile. Miss Chalmers, who else besides you and Kramer had access to these materials?" She thought hard. "Only Miss Caro. She assists with chemical prep for the advanced classes." The silence that followed could have cut glass. I said, "You mean Nina?" She nodded, her face pale. It was exactly 6 minutes after lunch when the knock came, an interruption that, by Wolfe's standards, ranked just below a home invasion. The menu had been lamb cutlets with tarragon, sautéed mushrooms, and Fritz's idea of a perfect béarnaise. Wolfe was leaning back, eyes closed, contemplating whatever mysteries the digestive process holds for him, and I was doing my bit to keep quiet until the doorbell decided to ruin it. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. He simply said, "Archie, that's my cue in the same way play ball is for the umpire." I left the dining room, wondering which unfortunate soul had chosen this exact hour to test their luck. At the front door stood a woman in her late 30s, the kind who looked like she'd spent a long time learning how not to cry in public. Her hair was the right kind of wrong, too carefully arranged for someone who claimed she wasn't trying, and her gloved hands clutched a manila envelope that had seen better days. I said, "You've caught the house in its sacred hour. Either you're lost, desperate, or reckless." "Which is it?" She managed a brittle smile. "Perhaps all three. My name is Lydia Chalmers. I was told Mr. Wolfe might see me." That made me blink. Nobody told anyone to see Wolfe unless they'd already paid the admission fee, metaphorically speaking. Still, there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't used to being ignored. "All right, Miss Chalmers," I said. "Come in, but don't expect applause." She stepped inside, taking in the brownstone like a tourist glimpsing a cathedral. I led her to the office, where Wolfe was already at his desk, his eyes now open but clearly wishing they weren't. "Mr. Wolfe, this is Miss Lydia Chalmers," I announced. "She's either lost, desperate, or reckless." Wolfe tilted his head a quarter inch, which was his version of a bow. "Sit, madam. State your business succinctly, if that's possible." She took the red leather chair like someone sitting down to confess. "Mr. Wolfe," she began, her voice crisp but trembling at the edges. "I work for the Metropolitan Culinary Institute. It's a private school for professional chefs. 3 days ago, one of our instructors, Mr. Alan Kramer, was found dead in his apartment." I felt Wolfe's interest stir, faintly, like a breeze moving through a curtain, and he said, She leaned forward, "The police ruled it a heart attack, but there was something they overlooked, a recipe card on his counter, stained with blood, just 1 drop, perfectly round. It wasn't his." Wolfe's brows moved closer, a sure sign that his mind had stepped into the arena. "How do you know it was not his blood?" "Because I had it tested," she said simply. "Without authorization. The blood type was AB negative. Alan was O positive. That did it. Wolfe opened his eyes fully and looked at her as though she'd just claimed to have found a truffle in Central Park. You arranged a private laboratory analysis of blood evidence from a police-closed death? Yes, she said, unapologetic. Because I don't believe he died naturally. He had enemies, competitors, and a secret recipe he guarded more fiercely than his wallet. Someone wanted it. Wolfe closed his eyes again, as if sealing the thought away. Madam, I dislike intrusion. Yet you have brought me one. Why come to me? Because, she said, her voice dropping, yesterday morning I found the same recipe card, an exact duplicate, in my office drawer, and this one had my initials written on it, in blood. I glanced at Wolfe. His lips pressed together, forming a horizontal line that could have bisected a lesser man's courage. He said, "Phooey, that's Wolfe for you, interest me despite my will." "Archie," he said quietly, got the envelope from her. I took it. Inside was a clear plastic sleeve containing the recipe card. It was for something called ragu di Parma, confidential Formula 3. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and near the top corner, sure enough, a single dark brown fleck, the kind that used to be red. I asked, so what was this secret recipe supposed to do? Raise the dead? She shook her head. It was part of a research project for a flavor stabilization technique that could revolutionize packaged foods. Alan was going to sell it to a corporation, but he died before the deal. Wolfe murmured, "A chemical miracle in a kitchen apron." "How appropriate." He gestured at me. "Archie, make note, we are dealing not merely with murder, but with greed disguised as gastronomy. And madam, before you proceed further, do you intend to hire me?" Her eyes flicked between us, uncertainty in every line. "If you'll take the case, yes. I have a retainer for $2,000. $2,000, Wolfe repeated, to disturb my digestion and my peace. He closed his eyes again. "You may leave the card. I shall think." That's as close as Wolfe ever got to saying yes. She left soon after, shoes clicking like tiny warnings down the hall. When the door shut, I turned to Wolfe. "So," I said, "you're interested?" He sniffed. "Interested? Hardly. Intrigued, perhaps. The distinction matters. Blood on a recipe card bag. But why return it to her, and why mark it with her initials? That archai is a question of taste. Meaning? Meaning, he said, that someone is seasoning this affair for my palate. And I intend to know the cook. To be continued in Section 2, the brownstone disturbed. By 5 o'clock the next afternoon, Wolfe had done what he always does when faced with a puzzle that smells faintly of human folly. He'd planted himself in his chair, tilted back, hands resting on the arc of his stomach, and declared a moratorium on all sound except that made by orchids or thought. I had learned that silence from Nero Wolfe isn't absent from its occupation. The man's mind moves like a glacier, slow, cold, and utterly unstoppable. Fritz was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he experimented with a sauce that could make angels trade their harps for spoons. I was at my desk pretending to read the afternoon paper, but actually watching Wolfe for signs of life. There was none. Not until the phone rang. Wolfe grunted. "I got it." "Goodwin," I said. A woman's voice, tight, professional, and carrying the clipped tone of someone trying hard not to be afraid, came through. "This is Lydia Chalmers. I didn't want to disturb you, but something's happened. Someone broke into my office last night. Nothing was taken, but every file drawer was open. And the recipe card I left with you, are you certain you still have it?" I looked at the desk. The plastic sleeve lay exactly where she'd placed it, beneath Wolfe's magnifying glass, untouched since yesterday. "Yes, Miss Chalmers," I said. "Safe and sound. Want to tell me who you suspect?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. But there's a man chef, Julian Ferris. He and Alan Kramer were partners years ago. He left the institute after some scandal about stolen formulas. He's just been rehired, and today he told me I'd regret involving the police. I glanced at Wolfe. His eyelids twitched, which meant he was listening. "We'll look into it," I told her. "Stay put. Don't talk to anyone else." When I hung up, Wolfe opened his eyes. "Pfui," he muttered, a warning from a cook, the melodrama of knives and egos. "Then you don't think it's serious?" I asked. "I think it's inevitable," he said. "Where ambition and seasoning meet, there is always blood. Fetch the Gazette directory, Archie. We shall start with facts, not flourishes." It took me 5 minutes to dig up the directory entry on the Metropolitan Culinary Institute. Wolfe had me read off the names of the executive board, department heads, and prominent instructors. When I mentioned Julian Ferris, Wolfe said, "Stop there." He closed his eyes again, but this time I could tell something was brewing. "Archie, you will call Inspector Kramer. That brought me up short. Now hold on. You want me to invite the law in before we even have a client who believes we're on the case." "I want," he said evenly, "to know whether the police truly ruled Kramer's death a natural one." I detest building theories on sand. It took a dozen calls, 2 cigars worth of patience, and 1 promise to meet for a drink I had no intention of keeping, but eventually Kramer's gravelly voice came through the line. After a short exchange of polite threats, he confirmed that yes, Alan Kramer had been found dead in his kitchen, alone, no signs of struggle. "Heart failure," they said. "No autopsy requested." When I hung up, I filled Wolfe in. "So that's that. The cops didn't even take a fingerprint." Wolfe made a noise like a bear exhaling, sloth disguised as certainty. "Well, then we must earn our fee." He turned his head slightly. "You will visit this institute, Archie. Observe. Ask questions. Listen, not for words, but for envy. Envy, my boy, leaves the loudest silence." That was my cue. I put on a suit decent enough to blend in among culinary elites and headed downtown. The Metropolitan Culinary Institute was a glass palace of ambition too clean, too white, and smelling faintly of lemons and pride. Lydia met me in the lobby, her nerves polished into professionalism. "I shouldn't have called you," she said as she led me toward her office. "The board will be furious if they find out." "Miss Chalmers," I said, "when people start breaking into offices and leaving threats in italics, it's already too late for good manners." Her office had modest file cabinets, a desk, framed diplomas, but one thing was off, a faint trace of some floral scent that didn't belong. She noticed me sniffing and said, "That's Ferris. He wears a ridiculous amount of bergamot cologne. He came in this morning, uninvited. Did you report the break-in?" She shook her head. "No. I'm afraid they'd think I'm hysterical." I walked the perimeter of the room. Every drawer had indeed been opened and closed again. Whoever did it wasn't looking for money, they wanted information. I checked the wastebasket clean, almost too clean. Then I saw it just under the desk, half hidden by the chair leg, a torn scrap of